Hi everyone, my name is John. Welcome back to my channel. I read over vacation a few weeks ago a great little book from the University of Chicago Press that I wanted to share with you and talk a little bit about. I haven't read philosophy proper in probably a few years. A lot of my reading has been taken up with history, mostly because I'm a co-host of a major history reading event. And I guess you could read this for Historathon. I mean, he was born in the Historathon quarter we're currently in. So let's call it a Historathon book. This is, I don't know if I already said it, but I showed it in a couple of videos ago in my University Press Hall book. This is Arthur Schopenhauer, The Life and Thought of Philosophy's Greatest Pessimist by David Bather Woods. And look at that face. That is a face that everyone would love. Look at that. Don't you want to take that home? I mean, come on. Yeah. Um, Schopenhauer gets a rap because, well, obviously you can tell from the subtitle, he is known as maybe the most pessimistic philosopher, great philosopher ever in the history of Western philosophy. And it is one hell of a task to look beyond the sort of cantankerous malcontent that you see there on the cover, and that he proudly shows himself to be in every portrait taken of him, and to present him in a book as a thinker whose pessimism, however dark, has practical and ethical and even humane implications. Schopenhauer didn't wear a minty, fresh toothpaste smile, and he wasn't interested in pretending that the universe was arranged for his or even your personal enjoyment, and apparently those two things are enough to get him called philosophy's greatest pessimist. But despite being such a prickly figure, and he was a prickly figure, David Bather Woods' new biography of him, which is called Arthur Schopenhauer, The Life and Thought of Philosophy's Greatest Pessimist, which came out the end of last year from the University of Chicago Press, never fails to find the human and the compassionate and the ethical and the deeply moral in Schopenhauer's ideas. And that's one of the reasons why I loved it so much. Intellectual biographies, I find, invariably tilt toward one pole. They either privilege the subject's life or their ideas, and rarely give equal weight to both. But Woods strikes a perfect balance here, I think, fleshing out biographical details like Schopenhauer's uneasy relationship with his parents, especially his mother, or his difficulty in forming romantic relationships. Wonder why. And his thought on various topics, from politics to death and suicide and fame and madness. The result is, in part, a chronological, traditional retelling of the major points of Schopenhauer's life, interwoven with thematic accounts of how he turned his personal experiences into a philosophy of empathy and endurance. Schopenhauer's most famous work is called World as Will and Representation. And one of its theses is that all human experience is subject to will, sort of capital W will, a blind, aimless, non-rational striving that manifests in everything. For obvious reasons, this complicates and maybe upends popular 19th century shibboleths about progress and reason and goodness. When the blind striving of the human ego or will drives the way we perceive the world, all that can result is desire, frustration, boredom, decay, and eventual death. Sometimes desire can be satisfied, but it soon gives way to more relentless desire and more willful instinct. And if you detect more than a trace of Freud here, you're not wrong. Schopenhauer's idea of the will highly echoes Freud's idea of the ego, as do his ideas about sexuality and the insatiability of desire. Notice that the ego, which is never a word that Schopenhauer uses, but it's obviously one that Freud will go on to use, and our insistence on seeing ourselves as separate and distinct from others are really at the root of the problem here, at least for him. There are ways in which we can loosen the grip of the will, but even then it's temporary. Aesthetic experience allows us to forget our own individuality and lose ourselves in beauty. And moral consciousness defrays the illusion of egoism by allowing us to recognize suffering and consequently to see ourselves in others. Schopenhauer was born in 1788 into a family that pursued commerce, a very bourgeois German family. His father's unexpected death by suicide was a turning point in his life. He gained not only a generous inheritance that allowed him to think and live independently, but also a philosophical vocation. His mother, Johanna, was a famous salonière who rubbed elbows with the likes of the Schlegel brothers and Goethe. And her success as a novelist and literary grande dame drew Arthur's ire. He was very, very jealous of his mother's success. And when he wrote World as Will and Representation, it got a very subpar reception. And it caused him to become even more embittered, especially since he was very, very convinced that he deserved the attention that he would eventually get decades later for it. But he didn't get it for, well, many decades. And it was only during the last 8 or 10, 12 years of his life, this is a man who lived to be into his 70s, that he finally gained the attention of a couple of student acolytes and translators interested in introducing his work to wider audiences, namely English-speaking audiences. It's easy for a biographer to let Schopenhauer sit in the corner and grimace to himself like the misanthrope that a lot of people assume he would be. He certainly looks the part. He was abrupt, and he held deeply misogynistic views. He was self-pitying, and he had more than his fair share of confidence, like I've already said. He famously suggested that his lectures, when he was living and lecturing in Berlin, be held at the same time Hegel's were being held, sure that students would decamp to his lectures instead of Hegel's. And he was wrong. And he stewed in resentment because of it. Woods never lapses into fawning hagiography or overweening criticism. He's a pretty objective writer and takes Schopenhauer in stride for the difficult person that he is or was, and he challenges you to see in him one of the first European philosophers who, while he has this reputation, again, there's the picture. I mean, he was one of the first European philosophers to take the idea of animal rights seriously, and someone who grounded his ethics in deep, deep compassion for other people. Two things that may not exactly emanate from that photograph. Schopenhauer isn't known for being one of the unreadable German philosophers of his own day. That recognition is usually saved for the likes of Hegel and Kant, both of whom produced turgid prose with the effortless regularity of a factory assembly line. In fact, he was explicitly critical of the academic language infecting contemporary philosophy of his day, and he claimed it was a smokescreen for so much of what it was, at least for him, which was obscurantist nonsense. As a result, his prose, Schopenhauer's prose, in both The original German and good English translation is clear even to someone not well versed in philosophy or his philosophical predecessors like Fichte, Schlegel's, and Novalis, and all of those other uh, late late 18th, early 19th century Germans. Woods takes the transparency of Schopenhauer's prose seriously and recreates it clearly and compellingly, combining the most pertinent details of Schopenhauer's life, like I said earlier, with the development of his ideas. And the result is a model of gloriously crisp writing, and dare I say it, something that would have put a knowing grin on Schopenhauer's face. If you have an interest in 19th century German philosophy, or Schopenhauer in particular, this will be a book I think that you will read, and eventually, when you come back to Schopenhauer, want to reread for just information about his life and how it dovetails, like I said, with his ideas. It has earned, in the other room, my library room, despite this nonsense, this is not my library. It has earned a permanent place on my library bookshelf, on the one where I have all of my philosophy books. It's a really, really great Schopenhauer book. You don't have to know a lick about him to appreciate it. You can just walk in blind, may have heard of his name, wonder what he thought or wrote, and this is a really great introduction that won't go too far in the weeds, but will leave you walking away like you feel like you've actually learned something about the man, his life, and what he wrote. So, if you're interested, check this out: Arthur Schopenhauer, The Life and Thought of Philosophy's Greatest Pessimist, by David Bather Woods, from the University of Chicago Press. My name's John, and I will see you soon. Bye.